10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our first ever live event, the Roundtable on Disinformation in the Balkans during the COVID-19 pandemic. This roundtable has been organized by the regional network of fact-checking organizations called CET or Southeast European Check Network. And in brief, we will be an hour, perhaps a little over an hour in time. You will be able, everyone who made it in time to register on Zoom will be able to use Zoom to ask questions. All the questions will be gathered throughout the event, so you can ask them at any time. And we will receive them at the end of the panel in the segment where we will be answering your questions. So, also, another housekeeping rule, given the time limit, I will ask kindly all the participants to stick to the time limits that they have, and they promise not to be angry if I cut them off if they go over time. So now let's see who we have with us today. So first we have from Croatia, from Faktograf, Ana Brakus, Jelena Vasic from Krik, from Serbia. Then there is Katarina Bulatović from Slovenia, from Razkrinkavanje. Milica Kovačević from razkrinkavanje.me from Montenegro. Rosana Leksoska from Most, from North Macedonia. And I am Tijana. My name is Tijana Cvjetićanin. I'm from razkrinkavanje.ba from Bosnia and Herzegovina. So welcome all the panelists. We will start with brief introduction of our network, which is an idea that a lot of us had for a while, but we've been dragging our feet a little bit until this pandemic hit and kind of made us speed up the effort to connect and to start working with each other. So we are 7 organizations from 6 countries. We have 2 organizations from Serbia and 1 from Croatia, from Bosnia, from Montenegro, and from North Macedonia. Only one of our partner organizations is not with us today. That's Fake News Tragač from Serbia. So basically, the idea behind the connecting in one network in this region is that we have a lot in common, in political context, in the language that we speak, and in the type and the scope of disinformation that we all face in our work. So, as I said again, the pandemic, which has been followed by a very extensive infodemic that was especially felt here in the Balkans, was something that kind of pushed us to really start working together. And maybe for some contextual introduction, I would like to ask Ana to give us her view of what it is like that our borders do and don't do when it comes to disinformation and also fight against disinformation. Ana, can you hear me?
Hi. Thank you everyone for joining us. I think I've never had so many people watching a wall in my living room before. So we've talked about borders a lot these last couple of days whilst preparing for this conference. And one of the things that we've concluded is that dis and misinformation creators care about borders between countries only when they can be used to amplify the effects of the misinformation that they are creating. Otherwise, much like this new coronavirus, they really don't care, and their misinformation doesn't stop at the border. In our experience, the creators of misinformation, many of whom rely on the creation and the spread of misinformation for economic gain, feed off of nationalistic myths that exist in all of our respective countries. They heavily rely on prejudice and stereotypes that of course exist everywhere, but especially here they are used as sort of a boogeyman and sort of as a way to make sure that the spread of misinformation is even faster. Basically, the fact that most of our languages are very much alike also helps the creators of misinformation to reach a broader audience than they maybe even intended to in the beginning. This is just a few of the reasons why the CCheck initiative and the platform was started, and in my opinion, why it is important. Because if we understand that the creators of misinformation in this region don't stop at borders, they only use them. We cannot expect to deal with this infodemic if we don't cooperate and if we don't share knowledge and our local expertise with one another.
I absolutely agree. Thank you, Anna. So with that in mind, with the fact that we share a lot of content of this information, and what we also noticed during this time is that it has kind of spread and went through different stages that were very similar in all of our countries. So we've tried to create something that we call the disinformation timeline, to see what the trends were since January, since this really started becoming a topic in the media and in the vernacular in society. And we've structured this timeline through 3 periods that we will be covering. And this is the January and February, which was like the first response to the idea of something becoming a global threat. And the March, where we had a special form of denialism in this disinformation space. And we are now at something that we called April mayhem, because for very good reason, and we will see why soon. So in each of these 3 periods, we've structured them into 4 areas of disinformation. The first is something that we call disinfo chatter, and that is something that's like banal disinformation that appears at random anywhere. Second is the disinfo explanations, which is where we see some false narratives emerge, trying to kind of interpret the pandemic and various aspects of the pandemic. Finally, we have something that we call Disinfo Healthline, because we encountered a lot of disinformation regarding health and medical and science aspects of the pandemic. And the fourth thing that is not necessarily related to disinformation, but usually is, but is a form of harmful speech, is something that we call the narratives of intolerance during the pandemic. So for each of these periods, we will try to present like what the trends were in these 4 axes, so to speak. And for each of those axes, we will try to dig a little bit deeper as much as the time permits, and answer questions like where these narratives come from, who peddles them, with what motives, are they commercial or political, as Anna mentioned. If they're political, are they ideological or just like party politics and stuff like that. Another thing that we also want to touch upon is what is the impact that they had, how successful they were, how popular they were, why were they popular if they were, and especially what happens when you debunk them, because the experiences with debunking this information has been radically different during this time than at any before time, including even the elections, which is usually the wildest time when it comes to disinformation. So to dive right into the January-February period, which is a time where we had first reactions to the pandemic. And at that time, the reason for this title that you can maybe now see or not yet on the screen, for January and February, we called it the funniest virus ever. And the reason we use this sentence is something that came out of a now notorious, I think, press conference of Serbian government. So I will let Jelena give us a little context explanation there. Jelena?
Yes, thank you. Yes, I hear you. Well, it was, as you said, now a famous press conference in February at the Serbian presidency building. And we had also, unfortunately, now famous Dr. Nestorovic, who is also now a member of a government's crisis committee, telling everyone that coronavirus is the funniest virus ever. And, you know, that was on national television. You had officials behind his back laughing, and that was the message our citizens received, and that was the message and narrative that media later followed. And I'm sorry that Serbia was the place to spread that kind of misinformation.
And it did become famous throughout the region, basically saying this is nothing, this is funny. It's funny that you're even asking about this. That was kind of the message. So Katerina, can you tell us what was when it comes to this disinfo chatter, what was this dimension at the very beginning of the response to the not yet pandemic but epidemic that kind of started spreading around? What did you see in this first phase, so to speak? Oh, we can't hear you.
Yes.
Okay.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So, hi everybody. Yes. Well, I think that in January, media thought that this is just another only Chinese problem. I think it's safe to say that nobody really thought from the media also and from the public that this is something so serious that can turn our life around, not only for months, but also for years. However, in February, the virus was still something new for everybody, but already some conspiracy theories have started, such as that coronavirus originated in the laboratory and was released deliberately to weaken the Chinese economy, despite the fact that there's no evidence for that. However, after a while, in the end of February, we could notice, at least in my country, in Slovenia, that the media started to be very competitive about who is going to announce that we have the first infected in our country. So we had multiple cases where online media stated first infected is already in Slovenia, 2 weeks before that actually happened. So after one of the articles that it was published, we called to the clinic and asked if this is true. And the employees there said to us, people have been calling us all day because of that news, which is fake. There's no evidence at the moment for that. So the panic has already started. However, I must say that in Slovenia, we had a bit specific situation during pandemic crisis. Our prime minister has resigned in January, and political parties had two options: to change the government immediately or to go to elections. So therefore, the attention from the public were on the political situation more than on the virus. And because of that, we had a lot of other disinformation, not only about corona.
So the virus wasn't priority for
no,
disinformers in Slovenia.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
But you mentioned conspiracy theories, and this is something that brings us to the segment of disinfo explanations that we saw in this period. And these were the thing that dominated this part of the discourse was speculations on the origin of the virus, although there were no serious hypothesis or any kind of test results that would say that the virus is of artificial origin, man-made origin. This was something that was very present in the disinfo sphere. So Anna, I would turn again back to you for some more insight into that.
Well, I think we can basically all agree that in the beginning there was very little information that was backed up by science. There was very little information that we could say, just have a look at this very specific research or trusted institution, because it was just the beginning of the whole situation. People, I think, all over the world, and that of course means in this region, were scared and they were confused. And as we know, that feeling and confusion and fear in society is a very nice platform and a very nice playing field for disinformation creators it makes it more easy for them to spread misinformation and disinformation about specific topics. Probably the most interesting thing for me was that we noticed that misinformation that was being shared in that time was mostly by people who were trying to understand what was going on and were much more inclined to believe any information that was popping up just because it was first and everybody was trying to guess, what's actually happening. What we realized later on is when we had enough credible evidence and when we had a huge number of scientists agreeing that the virus is not human-made, then the politicians started to come into play. So then the whole idea and the whole narrative about the origins of the virus actually changed and switched into being used for specific political gains. So the origin story basically changed. And after we had a scientific consensus, it became something that was questioned by prominent politicians. Maybe probably the most famous person to do it would be President Trump, but he's not the only one. Yeah, that's just probably the most interesting part to me.
So can you walk us through it, just like very briefly, what the content was of this? What were the theories? Who made the virus and why?
There were a lot of them. In the beginning, the probably the most common one was that it was made by a lab in Wuhan, and then they differed in was it intentional or did the virus leave by accident?
Escape.
Yeah, the virus escaped. And what was interesting also at that time is that's when we first started seeing Bill Gates being introduced into the theories, mostly because of an exercise that was being done, Event 201, or that actually tried to say that the virus was already patented, that the virus has existed for a long time. So it was just it was a lot of different theories were circling and trying they were trying to become the most.
There was this also the very similar, a similar narrative is that it was created by big pharma. That's a term that a lot of conspiracy theories use in order to sell drugs or sell vaccines. But there were also the political ones saying like, oh, UK made it. There's like there was a group of UK intelligence officers that brought it to China, or the US made it, or China made it, etc. So there were very like geopolitical interpretations of the alleged artificial origin of the virus. And the drugs/vaccine also brings us to this like Disinfo helpline segment, which at this time was kind of bubbling with disinformation about what can protect you from the virus or even cure the virus. And Jelena, I'll turn to you again for comment on that.
Yes, actually, when people started being afraid, then you had infodemic of information regarding homemade medicines, and of course, garlic and lemon were popular again, as always. Yeah, and they were mentioned in mainstream media articles as so. But what was the most popular at a time was like fake doctor advices. And in Serbia, for example, we had the advice list from a doctor from Wuhan, unexisting doctor. And his advice list was first shared in Viber and WhatsApp chats, groups, and then it was actually published in a mainstream media. And why is that important? Because it was, very misleading. It had parts of it saying that if your throat hurts, you don't have coronavirus. If you drink water every 15 minutes, you can protect yourselves. And those are all lies, and people were actually buying those, following those advices. In Serbia, they were even circulated among school teachers. We as fact checkers were getting information about that schools are spreading those lists. My mother sent me that list on my phone, like, oh,
Yeah.
did you see this? So it was unfortunately very popular, those information about home medicines. And what scares me is that media were not playing responsibly at all. They were printing and publishing those articles just for clicks and to sell their newspaper. They didn't care. When we called the journalist to ask him, why did you publish this list? Did you check any information from that advice list? They were like, yeah, I didn't have time. I just translated it from an English website. And that is true, but the commercial side of it is scary
and pretty obvious, I'd say, as well. Yes, thank you. So to finish this first part of the timeline, we will look into what was the intolerance side of this first part of the pandemic spread, which is basically racism towards Chinese and even more broadly people from Asia. And Milica, can you give us some insight into that?
Yes, that is the when we saw the first signs, and as we could expect it later was spread to other ways of expressing intolerance. So when it really started, when it was still January, far away in China, we started to receive through the media photos of filthy Chinese markets, many of them fake. Chinese people were mainly portrayed through the let's say culinary habits that are strange to our local social and cultural context. The blaming of those that eat bats and snakes for the things that are happening to them, and they practically deserve that. After that, when virus landed in Europe and then in our region, we saw different patterns of not only racial but also social discrimination, with the outburst in Italy, for example. Here in this region, for days, media were full of articles with unfounded claims that virus was brought to Milano fashion factories by cheap Chinese workforce. In my own Montenegro, we have a big highway project with many Chinese workers, and different public figures, but also media started to spread the fear that we will all get infected if we get in touch with them. And just to conclude, this is not only something that you have in media, that this produce real results and in a very quick time. So, for example, and I think it's really illustrating what the campaign was, Montenegro and Croatia, both our economies are highly dependent on tourism. And media published really illustrative photos from coastal towns of both Croatia and Montenegro. Asian tourists carrying signs with written messages, "I'm not from China" or "I'm not Chinese." So that is how that affects real lives of people in the region.
Okay, if I may add.
Sure.
We also started to notice, not in the media, I must say, but or not at least in such way, but during the society, that there has been racism against tourists from Asia and to the people who have Italian citizenship, for example. However, we have been reading news on portal who's owned by a party who runs the government at the moment, and they were trying to convince us that migrants who are coming to our border are infected by corona. which was fake news. And they were still trying to convince us that the patient one in Italy is a migrant from Pakistan, no matter the fact that we still do not have the official announcement who that is. So just to produce that scare in the people and to make a panic from them.
Thank you, Katerina. I think this concludes the brief run through January and February period, and we are now entering the time where things got actually scary, even for those who were laughing it off with haha funny virus comments. Actually, quite interestingly, maybe the most rigid response to the virus came actually from the government in Serbia, whose initial attitude was, this is a funny virus. Go to Italy if you're a woman, estrogen is protecting you from it, etc. So the month of March brought a completely different attitude, with a number of cases becoming more significant, and even more importantly, when it actually started to spread, because in these first days, this was the moment that actually triggered panic. Okay, so we noticed there's like 1 or 2 people that were tested positive, but then when it starts spreading on your own soil, that's when it becomes actually frightening. And the discourse has changed along with that shift, and the disinfo sphere, if we may call it that, also shifted its attention from some of the motives outlined before. And what we saw in this like disinfo chatter compartment, so to speak, was still kind of light topics where you could see that people are trying to find the silver lining to kind of cope with this scary new situation. So we would see these nice stories about dolphins returning to the Venice canals, or I don't know, elephants doing something. I can't remember what elephants did. You could see the Eiffel Tower from London because the pollution is no longer that thick as it was, the air pollution, etc. So this was one kind of stream, and another one was spreading scary rumors. An interesting one was about people in white who present themselves as this disinfectant crew that were actually robbers coming to rob your house, which never existed. So these were the topics in this like banal side of disinformation space. However, in the area of disinformation explanations, things got a bit more complex, and we saw this initial narrative starting to go into these like fractals a little bit. So we had one branch that said, okay, the virus is real, and let me tell you what this really is and why it's here and who put it here. And another one was, no, it's not real at all. It's a hoax. Nothing is happening. So to take a look into this, one of the branches of the virus is real stream was, yes, it's real, and it was created, again, it's artificial. It was created as a geopolitical tool. So let's dive into what that was like, Anna, for this time period.
Probably the most it's actually one of the most read articles Faktograf has ever published. It's a debunking of a story that 40,000 US troops are entering Europe and are ready to basically invade. The really interesting part about that story was, even though it was trying to say that the pandemic is being used in order for the U.S. troops to invade, it did cover the part of the virus being real, with the fact that the U.S. troops had already been vaccinated against the virus. So it was really a story that hit this whole region basically as some sort of a storm. It has a lot of elements that really go well here in terms of creating a fictional story that is going to spread well in this region. First of all, it was a lot of it was based on on a real military what do you call it? Let's say a practice that was being done in Europe, and then it was just added on with just crazy conspiracy theories. One of the things that we did at Factograph was that we started a live blog about how this corona crisis is actually affecting human rights and democracy in this whole region. We thought that was really important and very much connected to this story, because we need to understand that people in this region are very easily influenced and scared with war terminology and with ideas of invasion. It's just it's something that must be taken into account when we try to understand why this story about the American troops spread so easily. I think you also did a story on that, and you discovered that it actually started from this Italian guy that is some sort of a strange mix of a fitness model / political analyst,
life coach, aspiring life coach, something like that. Can you, Rosanna, can you give us a few, because this was also an interesting case for you. Can you give us your perspective on it?
Yes. So the citizens of North Macedonia are regularly exposed to anti-NATO and anti-US narratives, which are more aggressively presented in the online space since the country started its Euro-Atlantic integration. So the disinformation about Defender Europe 20 were connected to coronavirus. It's the same as my colleague Anna explained. And this is just a good example of how real events through manipulation of facts becomes conspiracy theory. What is important for us to stress is that this story reached North Macedonia in a period of 2 days after it was first published on Serbian portals.
Yeah, that's where it spread throughout the region. I think it actually came from first. It was first published in Serbian, I think, tabloids or some sort of media like that. But then we have another instance of the virus is real, but which is an interesting take coming from mostly from like sources like Sputnik again in Serbia, which was we called it, yeah, the virus is real, and it's not necessarily a geopolitical tool, but it's an eye opener. It's showing us like who is weak and who is strong and who is capable and equipped to fight it and who isn't. So Milica, can you walk us through that?
Yeah, what we basically saw is, I mean, there was also, to be honest, lots of fair reporting about the fact that the political West wasn't ready for this pandemic, and
right.
the European Union wasn't ready for the response to the health crisis of this size. But as for a few weeks before that, news about pandemic almost cleared the media space and expelled everything from that, and then we saw that existing patterns of pro-Western and anti-Western media are being reflected in reporting about the virus from this perspective. On the side of disinformation, we first saw news that European Union abandoned Italy, that it abandoned the Western Balkans, which especially culminated after the public statement of the Serbian president, who declared the end of European solidarity and turned for us to look for other partners. Then we had a fake news that European Union prohibited the export of medical equipment. And then we had a series of fake news about basically Italians leaving European Union for that, or celebrating, removing EU flags or putting on some other flags. At the same time, we had again one line of news of disinformation about Russia's great response, strong arm of their leader that stopped the epidemic, and not just that, they are ready to help to the rest of the world, to assist us all with military disinfection and so on and so on. This all was already visible as a part of the narrative that exists. So European Union is presented as weak and selfish, as well as the United States. NATO is, well, in best case scenario, not interested. Why Russia and China to some point saved the world? They are the saviors.
And there were actually some genuinely fun pieces of disinformation about this, like strong iron fist response from Putin, which included that he put lions in the streets to stop people from going out and spreading the virus, or giving ultimatums, like a made-up statement from a made-up press conference that never happened, or that he ordered all the supermarkets to ration food, stop from shortages from happening, etc. Some were actually funny. There was like a movie scene that was presented as a scene from the streets of Moscow where lions were walking around. So, and interestingly enough, people seem to like that. They seem to like the idea that someone put wild animals out in the streets.
It's maybe funny for you and me, but actually this region is a fertile soil to accept that messaging, which was basically saying that democracies are not ready to respond, and that autocratic regimes have proven to be better in dealing with pandemics.
Yeah, which was factually inaccurate. That was sadly seen before and after that, but that was the narrative. Rosanna, do you want to also jump in on this aspect of the spread of the narrative?
Yes, from the examples that you have mentioned, what is obvious is that there is a battle of narratives that is going on throughout the whole region. So the coronavirus created additional space to amplify these anti-Western narratives served by the usual anti-West actors. The support to combat the coronavirus was actually one of the vehicles for the disinformation and propaganda. Unfortunately, we had a disinformation campaign about the technical support that North Macedonia received from the EU. And now we have a kind of a situation where the support to the Balkan countries to combat coronavirus from EU and its Western allies is undermined, while the support from China and Russia is being glorified. So worth mentioning also in this regard is that the systematic and strategic support from EU and US and other Western allies through their mechanisms allocated to every country in the region, at least in a decade, is neglected. So the aim of these disinformation narratives are to impact citizens' perception, thus creating mistrust in the institutions and processes, and inside Euro-Atlantic skepticism.
So basically, in line with that, the motive of distrust in institutions, which is a very strong and present factor in all of these segments that we're mentioning. One that was particularly troubling was this idea that the virus is made up and that hospitals throughout the world are in on some conspiracy, some scheme to present it as real while it's not. So there was a lot of this denialist narrative saying that no, hospitals are not actually full, they're empty, they're lying to you, this is not a real virus, it's just a flu, it's just a cold, etc., etc. And particularly troubling narrative was related to this hashtag Film Your Hospital that started spreading, that actually got its like a bump in the popularity through, I think, a Fox host who retweeted the hashtag or something like that. So that was a kind of a U.S. right-wing conservative-based conspiracy that started spreading here, and we had a lot of people. We had a woman who is from the Balkans who lives in Italy and probably works in one of those hospitals, not as a medical worker, as a cleaning lady or something like that, and she filmed this corridor in a hospital that was empty because it was emptied to handle the pandemic. This went viral so fast, and people started getting really angry when you debunk something like this and say, no, this is not correct. This is what the hospital is saying. This is how they're explaining why this part of the hospital is empty. So this is where things for us as fact checkers also start to get a little bit unpleasant, because there's this growing sentiment that there's a global conspiracy going on, and if you point to the holes in that narrative, you become instantly accused that you're a part of it. And this has escalated since, but we will go into that later. For now, I would like us to run briefly through the Disinfo helpline aspect of this period in March. Jelena, this is again something where fringe doctors such as aforementioned Nestorovic were kind of dominating the scene, right?
Yes, he is the main celebrity, but the other countries had their stars as well.
Oh, for sure.
You had in Macedonia Markovski, then in Croatia Gajski. We had a lot of doctors who were behaving I must say, like as you mentioned, it was hard for fact checkers to actually now take and step in those shoes and fact check doctors, because people believed the doctors, and that narrative that they were spreading, that this virus is not a big deal, it's just a flu, it's common cold, not that contagious, that was easily embraced by a large number of people who were, who disliked the lockdown measures. And many started believing that they're being harassed by the government over nothing. That was very dangerous. And I must say, it was very present. You had that celebrity, Dr. Nestorovic, being in media so often. He was on TV every day, and we had fact-checked one TV show where he was a guest for 2 hours, and he was talking about coronavirus and many other things. And it took us 5 days to fact-check all the things he said wrong in that show. And it's kind of, as you said, not a pleasant time for fact checkers, but we really now have to convince people that not all doctors are saying the truth in these very dangerous times.
Yes, especially those with history of peddling pseudoscience, like the one that you mentioned, Lydia Gajski, who is a very prominent anti-vaccination activist, while also being a doctor with an actual degree. So these are particularly a complex situation if you find yourself in as a fact checker. There's also another dimension of this, like this info helpline, which is cures, magical cures that started appearing around this time. So Milica and Rosanna, could you give us some examples?
So that we are speaking about March. That's the time when the entire region is practically in a full lockdown. So nothing is going on, and there is no news, and there is no good news about pandemics. So it's huge number of deaths and infected everywhere around the world. So what we are seeing a flood of headlines every day with different magical cure. And we saw news about Cuban interferon, Russian Arbidol, Mafloquine. We saw many news even about our cures, so local treatments like Sumamed in Croatia, chloroquine in Bosnia and Serbia, famotidine in Serbia as well. And I would just mention that probably the biggest issue on this line of communication was boosted by the statement of United States President, who basically promoted one of the combination of antibiotic and antimalaric as a super treatment for the disease. These things were easy to fact check, so it was easy to find out that many antiviral, anti-malaric antibiotics were tested, in clinical trials, that even in some countries they are introduced to emergency protocols, but that none of that is yet scientifically or practically confirmed. Right. And this is not listed as a cure.
Right.
So it was
to this day, there's nothing similar.
But what we all find, I think, very difficult is actually to convince people, because this also is a very good place for a new conspiracy that there is a cure, but we won't get it. The ordinary people won't get it. So what that caused in real life was hoarding of medicines. So in Montenegro, and I think that I've read in some other countries, for example, the medical authorities, the health authorities had to retract all anti-malaric medicines from the pharmacies, A, to have them available for those that need them, and B, if they are ever really proven as treatment, to have them for people that they are treating.
Yeah, and there were very real consequences to these narratives. The two medications that you mentioned, the one from Bosnia and from Serbia, are new. They were actually now being manufactured because they were touted as a cure, or at least something that is proven to be efficient in fight against COVID-19, which still is very inconclusive, and it's still not the case that it has been proven. So we have two new manufacture lines because of the sensationalist approach, starting with Donald Trump's Twitter, and then moving along all over the place. But there were also interesting talks of cures that came from like a Cuban cure, a Russian cure. Rosanna, can you walk us through that very shortly?
Yes, so more concerning part are the false information, disinformation, fake stories that are being spread on the social media, and that they're coming from unofficial sources, anonymous websites, proxies. So there are videos that are shared with Arbidol as the best antiviral cure, and all of this stuff are actually leading people to not seriously understand and take the virus and the situation. So by believing in this, people are risking their health and the health of their families.
And if I may add,
it's pretty understandable when certain people and certain officials are discussing, trying to, have this discussion about different types of medicines. What is the problem is how the media, especially the social media and anonymous Facebook pages, are actually distributing that to the people.
And so there was especially with Arbidol, there was, I think this was the first time when I thought, okay, so the thing that's happening now is unlike anything that we have ever seen before, because that video with an anonymous person who I think is a truck driver. You can like get that from context. And he saw a package of a medicament in Russia called Arbidol, and it says coronavirus on its instructions. So because he's not a person with a medical background or education, he thinks that this is a cure, it exists, and no one is telling this to the people, and he has this sense of urgency that he needs to share it. And then it starts exploding everywhere, and people are sharing it tens of thousands by days and hours, and it like one gets removed, 10 more pop up, and then you're looking at this and you're just like, what is going on? And it makes people think that there really is something that is being hidden from them, because okay, so there is a cure, it exists, so why don't we have it and they do? So that's a very also something that stirs these dangerous sentiments of, yeah, they're not telling us the whole truth about this from whichever aspect. But then I think we went a little over time still on March, and let's move into the current hell that we live in, and that's the segment that we called April Mayhem. The reason why we called it April Mayhem is because all of these things that we mentioned before, stuff like, I don't know, disinfo chatter or disinfo helpline, that were really bothering us during February and March for all the reasons that you heard before, they really faded in the background, because the segment that we call Disinfo Explanations, it took a whole new turn, and it's still happening, and it's very, very troubling. What had happened there is that basically the conspiracy theories saying that the virus is a hoax, they prevailed, but they didn't just prevail in the shape and form that we have seen in the beginning. They have developed and they have mutated, and the two major influences that we saw in that was one person called David Icke, or Icke, I don't even know how to pronounce his name, but who is like a famous conspiracy theorist that was not really ever taken seriously by anyone that I know, at least. A guy that came up with the story that the world is ruled by a alien race of human lizards, reptilians, or something like that. Apparently, he became a health/science authority for a lot of people during this last month, and a lot of his videos are being translated. They're given little subtitles in our language, shared again in tens of thousands, seen by millions. And not just that, there are this whole new class emerging of something we call corona influencers, and these are people that just take his scripture and then read it into a camera, and they themselves make these super viral videos, and they kind of start making a name of themselves on the peddling these really, really insane stories, basically. So that's the first line. The second one is much more complex and actually much more terrifying. It's something that is called QAnon, and this is a fringe group of supporters of Donald Trump, who is actually somewhat more like a cult than like a political caucus of any kind. And they have been active for the past few years in the US with the theory that has its essence in a claim that the world again is ruled by a cabal of Satanist, cannibalist, pedophile, entities connected together in who are responsible for everything that's wrong. But mainly these are people who are political opponents of Donald Trump domestically, and whoever is perceived as being along the same ideological lines internationally. And a lot of this has been kind of compressed and put together in a movie called Fall Cabal that has again also been translated hundreds of times and posted online and seen and shared and liked in hundreds of thousands of times in the last month. And this is something that is frightfully becoming mainstream on social media in the Balkans. So the QAnon theories, where you would have one of the most prominent ones would be that the artist Marina Abramović, who has origins in this region, is actually a Satanist who eats children to keep her youthful looks. And this is completely real. This is what they're saying. They are now being discussed. These topics are now being discussed in the media. You would have an interview or a statement from Marina Abramović saying, I'm not a Satanist, and then there's an article discussing whether she is or she isn't. So that's what's really really terrifying in this stage of the how to say narrative timeline. So the two major parts of this are conspiracy theories regarding the 5G technology, the 5G network, and Bill Gates as a person, Bill Gates as such. So this sounds very ridiculous to even say out loud, but basically Bill Gates is accused that he also is like behind some kind of global scheme that wants to put microchips in people through vaccines, and then these microchips are activated with 5G technology, or any kind of combination of these narratives that you can think of, is basically something that is considered pretty much mainstream on social network platforms throughout the region, I think in every single language that we use to communicate. So can you, Anna, also give us a little overview of this insane part of the whole story?
Well, basically, for a lot of things that you just explained, we had to create a name in order to try to understand what was going on. We started calling them basically super theories, because in April we realized that a lot of things that were popping up in January and February and March now in April converged into this one huge theory. So we had examples of Erna probably being the biggest thing in the region. It was a video that was filmed where a woman reads basically almost every conspiracy theory that existed up until that moment, and pushes it and smashes it all into one video. Yeah. So what we also realized is not only are super theories now being shared all over social media, elections are coming in a lot of our countries, which means that certain politicians in every country that we have members of CET coming from are trying to talk about conspiracy theories related to this virus in order to get reelected, or in order to get attention that they otherwise wouldn't get. So I'm not now talking about, you know, just like the political mainstream. I'm talking about fringe politicians that are trying to collect conspiracy theories in order to work for them. So almost everybody knows that that towers were being burnt down in the UK, in some places in the US. But it also happened in Croatia. So the 5G conspiracy theory, which in some cases, in a case of one specific doctor, was even taken a little bit further, and then she started talking about G6 technology. So the 5G wasn't enough. Mm-hmm. We also had a situation where people that live in a very small coastal city decided to basically destroy towers that were being put in that city as a part of a EU project that was supposed to give them Wi-Fi for free. They thought it was 5G towers that are being put while the corona crisis is ongoing. So basically in April, what we've noticed is this huge amounts of theories being put into one, and I also think that we also noticed that the cooperation between the misinformation creators has also been a lot better in the last month. We realized that a lot of videos are being translated much quicker than before. So we have and again, it's important to understand, if you have a medical doctor from, let's say, Germany, who goes on TV and talks for about 3 minutes. If he is translated into Croatian, Bosnian, Serbian, he can be understood in almost all of our countries without a problem. So that's what we mostly noticed in April.
And that has been happening. I mean, it has been shared across borders, as already mentioned before. And the example that you gave is a woman named Erna from Bosnia. She became also very famous region-wide after the conspiracy reading video. The term that you used, super theory, is really a great one to apply to the whole QAnon story in its own, because it is kind of a amalgam of all possible conspiracy theories that you could ever think of, that are all kind of put together in one narrative. So that is kind of what we're dealing with, because we have seen, but the difference now is that it's really seeping into the mainstream. It's not just the people who previously believed in conspiracy theories. We have converts now. We have people coming and commenting saying, oh, I didn't really know all of this before, my eyes are open now. So that's one very troubling dimension of it. And another one is that we already know that this is a hugely radicalizing narrative, and it has been radicalizing people in the States as well. There have been several acts of violence connected to this narrative already, including a shooting and a murder and really scary stuff like that. So this is something that we see in this like huge amount of aggression coming from the comments when we debunk anything that is close to these narratives. So that's also something that is different in this time compared to the before times. So Rosanna, could you also give us like a brief overview of how some of these narratives coincided with some of the political processes in the region?
So the disinformation campaign about the harmful effects of 5G and that 5G is causing coronavirus, that was conducted in North Macedonia on the 27th of March, actually was the day when the country became the NATO member. What happened here exposed the situation, which is valid for, I believe, almost all of the countries in the region, and that is that our societies are very vulnerable to this kind of hybrid threats, and our citizens are actually being the victims. What is interesting to note when we talk about the dissemination of the 5G disinformation are actually videos, with the conspiracy theorists from the West were subtitled and used. But we don't see our Western actors, media, or Facebook pages, or anonymous websites that are producing these videos with Serbian subtitle and distributing it in the region. So the point is, who has the interest to use and misuse these videos or these conspiracy theories and target the region with them. So yes, just to add what is very important for the whole story is that this is actually, we see a strategy of turning the West against itself. And the aim is to present that the West is also in disarray. So the idea of the disinfo is not actually to convince people in different truths or in what is truth, but it's more about flooding the space so the people don't know anymore what is true and what is false.
Which is definitely one of the effects of all of this madness that we've mentioned, and which brings us again to the issue of how we responded to this. I know from personally it has been overwhelming for me, especially when you start getting called a Satanist on daily basis online, and we as a network also try to mount some kind of crisis response because things have changed so drastically compared to the time before the pandemic. So what we did is we, as I said, we sped up all of these ways that we're trying to connect and cooperate. Can you walk us through some of those results that we kind of managed to produce in this time, Katerina?
Yes, it's pretty impressive, I think. The numbers of the increase in page views are very impressive for every member, I guess, of our network, and of course for other media also. I think that we learned how crucial we are as a service for citizens. So all 7 members have made more than 486 fact checks of COVID-related disinformation from the beginning. We have collected 4,050 members in our Viber community, where we were informing the public about what is true and what not on a daily basis. And around 436% of increase in page views in March and April was higher compared to January and February this year. So,
yeah. And this is something that we're seeing, I think, in all of our fact-checking platforms. This huge increase in page views and even the time that people spend on our pages. So you can see that people are really craving explanations and information, because all of this is really very confusing and scary. But you mentioned the Viber group, Milica. Can you tell everyone who's listening, like, what the Viber group is, or community is called, the community?
Well, we all before this had presence on different social media and our websites, but when this started, we also realized that Viber and WhatsApp and other communication platforms became also very important channel of spreading disinformation. And Viber is, according to all statistics, the most used messenger app in this region. So my mother doesn't have Facebook, but she receives dozens of messages on Viber, including all these cures of nature, medical advices, and things like that. And we decided then to use that platform also to try to debunk and to reach out to as many as possible of those users that are not already somewhere. We created altogether a Viber community where we are trying to produce content that is suitable for that kind of communication, and actually to try to get to the phones of those people that also received fake news directly in their smartphones.
And this is something that's been completely new to all of us, but I think I would say that it's working pretty well, considering the circumstances that were kind of that led to its creation, so to speak. Okay, so I think that we could like conclude here with the oh no actually there's one more thing, one more unpleasant thing that I would like to touch upon, and these are the final stage narratives of intolerance that have emerged when all of these super theories became super popular. And again, I would ask you about that, Milica, to run us through that really briefly.
I will, because many things are mentioned, but just like to wrap up with what we saw. First wave of intolerance was against Chinese people, and then it continued towards almost everyone else. We had a huge issue of stigmatization and discrimination of coronavirus positive patients, which was enabled by some irresponsible acts of regional governments, and here I am underlining government of Montenegro, that decided to make public lists of all people that are in imposed self-isolation, which basically created online militias, talking about privacy of these people, identified in where they had coffee or who they visited. And it was also present in other countries, especially while the number of infected was small, and it was still possible to follow on the individual basis. Then we have this big anti-migrant narrative that exists here throughout the time, that they like transformed from being hidden terrorists. Now they are hidden carriers of the virus. We always have this anti-Semitic narrative through scary stories about George Soros. Already mentioned Bill Gates. I think that kind of personal hatred should serve as an example. And he doesn't mean me as a lawyer, but it's really interesting to analyze how something that was, how a person's work in warning about dangers and our unreadiness for pandemic can be twisted completely to present him as, devil himself. And just something that you mentioned is that fact checkers became Satanists, and that we are now kind of a new conspiracy theory. And I think that Anna maybe can add here on some of their experience.
Anna?
Yeah, well, when we've really had a huge rise in readership in recent months. We've also published since the first one was published on January 29th. And up until this point, we've published well over 100 different fact checks related to coronavirus dis or misinformation. That, of course, leads to an incredible amount of trolls, of people willing to make threats, and of people that feel that feel basically exposed. And the thing that then they try to do is write articles about us as journalists, or write articles where they discover how we are financed, even though we have a full list of donors on our page. That is something that happens a lot. But it seems to me that more could be done in terms of in terms of certain, let's say, protections that we should expect for ourselves. I think that, like, a general rule in this whole community is that we try to take a lot of punches in order to try to create a field for dialogue and for conversation, and to try to build a community. But we really had to make a specific set of rules of what is hate speech and what will not be allowed on our Facebook page or on our Twitter feed, or what kind of insults are just not welcome.
Yeah.
But it's I think every journalist hates when they become a story. So that's something that we are really trying to keep as much as possible to be kind of low key. It's not something that we want to make front and center about this situation, because as you've said, the main reason that this group was formed is so we can share knowledge, so we can communicate more, so we can tell each other when we see something is happening and is spreading very, very fast. So I think that also creates a sense of community for us that kind of helps to deal with issues of threats and of just unimaginable numbers of trolls on our pages.
Yeah, and this has been a very similar experience, I think, for all of us when we prepared for this event. This is something that everyone could identify with, but I think that you are particularly exposed also because you have this partnership with Facebook, the third-party fact-checking status, which also makes you kind of more of a direct threat to disinformation, and people peddling that are responding very aggressively to that. So that's also, I think, an additional dimension of this whole story. And the platforms, and how platforms react to this, and how they do or don't introduce fact checking, and what what impact fact-checking really has on platforms is a really huge issue that unfortunately we don't have time to go in now, but this is something that warrants a serious discussion, especially in these times of crisis, because what we see is exactly this, that very scary radicalizing fringe narratives are moving fast towards the mainstream, precisely because it was made possible by platforms like YouTube, like Facebook, like Google, like Twitter, etc. So this is something that is a very interesting topic. Unfortunately, we're going to stop here, and we will let our panelists answer questions from the audience. I want to repeat again that you can use Zoom to ask your question, and we will try to answer as much as we can, which won't be a lot, I'm afraid, because we're way over time. And I would like to ask Katerina first a question from Lauren. And the question is, do some platforms stand out? Okay, that's a very, I eased into this question. Do some platforms stand out, or are we dealing with a cross-platform phenomenon? Katerina.
Well, I thought till coronavirus that Slovenia stands out because we are in the European Union. We are, let's say, successful country in some of the indicators on but however, as I mentioned, we had the government in our country changed in 1 month ago, 1 month and a half, and everything in public space changed like rapidly. The hate speech went up, and the fake news went up. Everything, I think, is changing at the moment. So people, I think that we are feeling a bit scared, and we don't know what is going to happen in next month. So I think that Slovenia at the moment is becoming one of the Balkan countries in order to in fact checking. You know, unfortunately, I had that kind of feeling at the moment. So.
Thank you, Katerina. So the next question, I'm sorry, I have 100 screens in front of me. The next question comes from Patricia, and it's, how can media make positive feedback during coronavirus, and positive feedback in how we all look at health crisis? Jelena, I would go to you for this one.
I'm not sure I quite understand, like positive feedback on what?
How we look. At how we look. So it goes like this. How can media during coronavirus make positive feedback? How we look at health crisis?
Well, actually, I think that this is like a very different times. I think that infodemic happened precisely because of the topic. You know, health is the topic, and that's why we had this flood of fake news. You know, people are scared and they would fall for any conspiracy theory. And how do you look at this from a different perspective? We as fact checkers, the only thing we can do is to continue to do our job, you know, to tell people the truth. And it is what it is. You cannot fact check every lie out there, but you can do your best. And I don't know what is our tool except our work.
Well, yeah, for sure. And this is a oh, I'm sorry, there are questions coming somewhere other than Zoom chat. Yes. Am I right on this? Okay. Yes. Okay, we're not seeing all the questions, I'm sorry. So yeah, we're repeating to please use Zoom chat to ask questions, because otherwise it won't reach me and I can't ask the panelists. So the question, one of the questions was what are the next steps for CECHEC regional network related to COVID-19 and in general? Who wants to take this one? Anyone interested in this one in particular? Okay, I'll take it. So the idea is basically to strengthen our cooperation, especially since what we're seeing is as has been described as a super theory or an amalgam of conspiracy theories, and it's really hard to tackle this kind of a mountain of disinformation as a single fact-checking organization. All of us are pretty under capacity in terms of the amount of work that has been thrown at us at this time. So what we want to do is cooperate more in very practical ways. For example, it happens quite a bit that the same disinformation pops up in all of our countries in more or less the same time, especially it's because of what Anna mentioned, that it's being translated and it's just like being spread really fast. So we have some kind of overlaps in the work that we do. We're trying to synchronize more, to kind of take stuff off each other's plates as much as we can in the work that we do. So that's one way. Another way is that we also want to make these types of conversations a bit more of a regular thing, so that it's not just a one-time event, but maybe something like a podcast, or at least like a periodical gathering to discuss these topics, because they are very niche in a way. People who follow only mainstream media or reliable media sources probably have no idea that their neighbors and family relatives now in thousands of hundreds of thousands believe that there's some scary cabal that eats children that runs the world. So that is a very, these bubbles, as we all know, are very much more emphasized by the internet and by the type of media diet that we have. So in that situation, it really helps that some of these topics are brought to light by conversations such as this one. That's another way of cooperation that we have in mind. And there are many. I won't go into a lot of how to say details, because that will take a lot of our time. And okay, we have I see a question now. How do we measure the conclusion that QAnon and stuff like that is going mainstream on social media in the Balkans? Do we have a sense how their prevalence in the region compares to other parts of the world? Oh, that's a very good question. I've seen a translation of this movie. The movie is called Fall Cabal. It's a bad English title, I have to say. It comes from a woman who is originally from the Netherlands. And she has become very popular very fast in the Balkans, but not just here. Because I've seen the translations into many other languages in Europe. And from what I remember, I think this is mostly like Eastern European languages, like Polish, Czech, stuff like that. And the original is in English, so it's not that hard to translate. English is pretty, well spoken around here. So it's not just here. And from what I'm seeing in the States, it's also like QAnon was on a bit of a decline. That's my impression, at least. But now the pandemic has kind of brought them, back up, and I think they are, well, recruiting, I think is the right word, more people than they were before this whole thing happened. So I think it's not just the Balkans, but the Balkans, to me at least, it's very interesting that you have something that is really from very far right fringes that is now becoming a household idea here. And it's not that surprising, to be fair, because people here have been bombarded with conspiracy theories from the 90s onward, from the war propaganda that was peddled in the 90s to this day. This conspiracy mindset has been built in the region, and when you see a crisis like this escalating, this really triggers a lot of things, including, I think, traumas left from the war, which fit well, unfortunately, into this narrative. So that's what I mean by going mainstream. By going mainstream, I think that it struck a lot of chords with people here, and more people believe it, and more people kind of describe themselves as converts. Someone who has seen the light now knows something that they didn't know before because of this theory. So that's the thing. Okay, so should we try to answer some more questions? We are super over time, but if you want to, we can. Yes? Okay. A question that I find very interesting is, how can one place counter narratives to targeted audiences? And there's, I think, a lot to go into there. So does someone want this one? guys?
So I can try to answer from our perspective. When we started our debunking portal, our first strategy was to focus on the people who already see fake news on daily level. So we used Facebook targeting for that. And when we debunk an article, then we boosted it towards the consumers of fake news, towards the people who already liked Facebook pages of tabloids and similar sources of fake news. So that was one of the way to get them. And how we actually realized that we succeeded is they first react very aggressively, like, you know, that's something they believe in. But through time, you know, when you receive several times an article that you believed that it was true, and then you have a fact check version, you have you have actually an option and to see that it's not. So that is one example, but I'm sure that what Anna has and Factograph has with Facebook is a lot of effective tool, but she can explain that.
Yeah, just before going into Facebook, I think it's important to note that Factograph this year is going into its 5th year. So we've already had an audience that was coming and that was interested in not only reading our fact checks, but they were interested in also in discussions with us. So this is we've noticed that we've been receiving we've seen a big increase in questions and comments and requests for fact checks coming from readers. So just in the last, I think, month and a half or so, we did about 50. We responded with articles to about 50 questions that we received from our readers. So I think that is one of the ways that you can effectively reach people. So if you're doing that, then you're not guessing what people want to read. You're actually providing a service to a specific set of questions that they already have. And of course, people that get articles in response to their questions are, in my opinion, more likely to spread that information among friends or colleagues. Also, a big influence in our ability to reach readers directly, especially the ones that have shared this or misinformation, has been through Facebook's third-party fact checker program, which has worked really well for us. It of course has specific set of issues that it brings. We get a lot of people asking us why do we censor their content and stuff like that, even though we continuously try to explain that we have no we have no control over that. So we do not remove the content from your personal Facebook pages or your personal posts. What we do get through this program is the ability to, as you can see, to tell people, the thing that you shared is wrong, and this is why it is wrong. I think just last month, Facebook published for the first time some numbers about this program, and IFCN, the network that we belong to, I think made a very fair comment about that situation. It's really good that Facebook finally has put out some numbers about this program, but it also needs a little bit more transparency. We would like to see the numbers also for this month, and that would really help us. So to reiterate how to reach people that have spread misinformation directly, I would say, well, listen to them and try to go where they are.
And you put a lot of emphasis on interaction with people.
Yes.
From what I gathered. Milica, could you also give us your take on this? Like that, there's a question that is very similar to the previous one, and that is how can the debunking stories how can they be presented in a user-friendly way?
Anna already shed a light to many things, but I just wanted to say that this pandemic's also made us think more about that, because we knew from before that the stories that we consider our best stories, like these very detailed with many evidence, with a lot of photos, are not necessarily our most read stories because they are too long or they are covering the topics that are not necessarily recognized as very important. So part of the question is actually engaging citizens and debunking the stories that they've read, that they received, that they recognize as a fake news, but also trying to understand that, especially in this thing, we don't get to be picky or to say it doesn't matter, this is only for certain audiences. These fake news are endangering public health, and that's why we actually had to move towards trying to get to as many people as possible. So fiber communities was one thing, but I also see that us and Tijana, also Bosnian organization, and also organization in Serbia, that we invested a lot now in producing, podcasts, videos, infographics, and even very simple, like single photos with some message, because and that is something that is easy to comprehend. You see it on one glance. It's easy to share because we also realize that our long stories are difficult to read, but short message or a photo or really small video can be easily shared. So there are ways, and I think that if there is something good from this, it's that we were forced to go faster with developing and thinking about this method than we would otherwise do in some more regular circumstances.
Right. I do see a downside of that, however, because what we're noticing a lot is that people don't really read the links. You put the link with the picture because this whole detailed information that we're so proud of is there, but they don't read it. And as also Anna mentioned before, we all publish everything about ourselves. Our names are there, our photos are there, our sources of financing are there, but people just don't read it. They don't know how to navigate this. And then when you when you give them a picture, sometimes we have a lot of comments like, but how do we know that this is true? Because they don't go to read the evidence.
Polls are showing that for media readers, I don't know exact numbers now, but extremely high number of people read only the headline or only look at the photo. So this is the readers we get. We don't have any better readers, and we'll have to figure out how to, we will never win this big headlines of tabloids, but at least to try to be more friendly to those users that we have, because there are no better than them.
Right. And there's also like there are two questions, one from Tihomir and one from Marian. And hi, Marian, by the way. They both concern mainstream media. One is what is our interaction with the mainstream media, and another one is whether we think that they are refusing on purpose to do any work regarding fact-checking. So I can take these two like really, really fast. Our interaction with the mainstream media is, I think, better now than it was before, because we have a lot of, little brawls with the media when we rate their articles. And this is something that is kind of understandable to a degree, that no one likes being, having some kind of label saying this is disinformation. But when all this started, I think that more mainstream media, at least this is the case in Bosnia, started realizing that this is not something that we're doing to be kind of a policeman or whatever we were called before, that like we are all on the really same task, and this is like trying to provide quality information to people. There are some, of course, that are hopeless, but I wouldn't call them mainstream media. So mainstream media I think have been more willing to engage with fact-checking initiatives than before. And I would actually personally be interested to hear if this is the experience of my colleagues from other countries. Anyone?
Well, we've had from media that you could call mainstream. I think we've had mostly a good response. They're, I would say, usually interested in the things that we write about. Probably the most concrete partnership that we have is with N1 Television. That's a CNN affiliate. So what they have on their page is their readers can click and notify Factograph if they want us to fact check something. We also in kind of a regular basis, especially since the coronavirus thing has started. My colleague has gone to their TV and talked about the things that we do, especially the fact that we have something called coronavirus live blog. So it's a page where we actually make it possible for our readers to see every fact check that we've done on coronavirus in the last 3 months. So I think mainstream media contacts us when they need specific talking points about about fact checking, about disinformation, and about more broader threats in this society. So.
Right. And this idea of a live blog, I think that Creek was maybe the first to do that, if I'm not mistaken, which proved to be very useful for people, because then they get like everything in one place and can have like a quick run through.
Yes, we decided to make that because we had so many fake news emerging on daily level that it was impossible to make that much articles. And then it's also, as you said, much easier to have everything in one place. Like you can track all the fake news and all the debunks, and it's became a trend, and I'm very happy that almost every member of our network has started a live blog after that, and also other media in Serbia have started a live blog about coronavirus, and I think it's been very useful for a lot of colleagues.
Yeah. Well, the good thing about this group is that everybody's quite happy when somebody steals your successful idea.
Yes,
so,
true.
Yeah, that's a good thing about this group.
Yeah, someone else was trying to say something?
Yes, if I can just add.
Sure.
It depends how do you define mainstream media. We have to be quite careful with that because, for example, media who are owned by political parties are attacking other mainstream media, let's say, but for other completely different reasons, not to be to have like open quality information, but with other reasons. So we have to be careful about that. But the thing is in Slovenia that we are still we are strangers to others media, I guess, because I think that they still think that we are attacking them with fact checking, but this is not our purpose. The goal is to have better democracy, and I think that that's a goal for everybody.
And I think with that, you're giving me like a good segue into the conclusion, because we have only one more question that's not answered. So, okay, let's run through that quickly. It's from David again, and it's about a lot of disinfo being spread for the clicks, and should the ad industry take more active role, and what can the sector do about that? So, and should we differentiate between those and the foreign disinformation operations? We do, actually. We had a research that we did in it was around this time last year, and we kind of sorted them, not just for Bosnia, but for the whole region, sorted them into these categories, like who comes from which sector and what's like the perceived motive of that. And you can see like who are the, what we call opportunist disinformers, who do that to gain revenue from mostly Google AdSense, and who you could like, by tracking their mutual connections, you could fairly assume that they are either a part of a campaign or at least a part of a movement or any sort of political grouping of a sort, including the foreign influence in this disinformation space. So yes, we do differentiate between those. Not in the daily fact checking though, because that's not what we do when it comes to, we just like really focus on facts. And for the question of the platforms and the ads, this is a really huge issue, because a lot of these very successful platforms that are completely anonymous, that have more followers on Facebook than our country has inhabitants, and so we're talking millions for a very small language that we speak in the region. They do this by combining, successful marketing on Facebook, getting people to the websites, and then their AdSense awaits there and makes sure that they have revenue from clicks. So that's a scheme that is like bursting with inauthentic behavior that neither Facebook nor Google are doing much about in this region, at least. So yes, definitely not just the ad industry, but maybe mainly tech companies can do a lot about that, and we hope that they will start doing more about that. Okay, so there's no more. Okay, there's one more. After we debug this info, we don't have this info from China, not that I know of. This info from Russia mostly comes in the form of Sputnik, and do we work with experts to investigate more? No, we have a bunch of topics that do warrant investigative journalism projects to come and follow, but that sadly doesn't happen. I'm not quite sure why, probably because we're all very much immersed in the stuff in the things that we do, but we're not ruling that out. That's a very interesting idea to us and has been for a while. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up. Thank you everyone for asking great questions, and to all that stayed with us for almost 2 hours. Thank you especially, and thanks to all the panelists. I would end on well, I don't know if I can end on a totally positive note. What I can say is that what Katarina mentioned in the end is very important, and this is that this work is really a part of building a healthy social and political fabric in our societies. That you cannot have a true functioning democracy if you have a lot of people being radicalized by these insane narratives, whether they come from Russian state propaganda or right-wing parties in the West, or the homegrown movements from our countries, etc. The thing that is really important is that people get sensitized to be able to recognize facts from fiction, to raise their level of media literacy, and to generally offer them more quality information than they are being offered, especially on social media. So that's something that we will try to continue helping with. And I think this is just the first one in the series of conversations that we're all going to have, and I'm really, really looking forward to repeating something like this, especially with all of you who were present here today. So thanks everyone, and bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you.